Okay. We'll get started in a minute, but just so you know, we are being recorded now. So.
I am getting a notification that meeting transcripts are only available to select Teams users, so I'm not sure if that's going to affect any kind of live captioning.
Oh.
But that's just, I'm using it in my browser. I am not using the Teams app, so.
Maybe
related.
that. Yes, because I'm sure that I was able to do it the other day when we were testing, so it might be that you have to be in the app. Okay, well, good morning. Oh.
Under more options, you can turn on live caption.
Yeah.
I don't have that option under more actions, so maybe it's
Okay.
limited to specific members. Oh well, not the end of the world for me.
Be, or the app, I don't know. Okay, good morning everyone. It's 10 o'clock, so we will get started. Welcome to day 2 of the conference, and you may or may not have the ability for closed captions by clicking on the 3 dots at the top of the page that has more actions and scrolling down to show transcript. Okay, and with that, I am going to turn this over to Frances Drone-Silvers to introduce our CE session.
Thanks, Cynthia. Welcome again to day 2 of the Health Science Librarians of Illinois 2021 conference. We're so glad you're joining us today. I'm delighted to introduce our first CE. Oh, I guess I should tell you a little bit about me. I'm Frances Drone-Silvers. My pronouns are she and her. I am with Carle Health in Urbana, Illinois, and I'm one of the team members on the Continuing Education Committee for the conference programming. I have been chatting with Karen since early 2020, hoping to have her and Annette come to our conference. We thought we would have an in-person conference, and then, COVID happened. So we've been waiting over a year to bring this one to HSLI, and Karen and Annette could not be more gracious in adjusting to our planning and our changes. And, oh, can we make it 2 hours? Can we do it on Teams instead of Zoom? So just so happy to have them here. Karen Gutzman and Annette Mendoza are both from the Galter Health Sciences Library and Learning Center at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. Annette is the Research Impact Librarian at the Galter. She's a member of the Research Assessment and Communication Department, and she assists in the creation and delivery of training sessions, guides, and consultations on topics related to understanding and communicating research impact. Karen is the head of the Research Assessment and Communications Department at the library. She develops, supports, and implements programs that increase awareness about digital scholarship and issues in the digital environment among faculty, researchers, and students at the Feinberg School of Medicine. I will put a link in the chat to their digital hub where you can find works by both of them and a whole lot of other resources, and much of the materials for today's session are also available in their digital hub repository. As Cynthia already said, this session is being recorded and it can be made available to those who registered for the conference. We had a couple of people ask because they registered and then got pulled into other meetings and couldn't attend in, live or in person right now. 2 hours of MLA-CE are available to those who requested when registering for the conference. I will email that information to those who requested the CE. If you have questions about that, you can email me and I will put my email in the chat. I want to thank Rittenhouse for sponsoring the CE and now turn it over to Karen and Annette, and I look forward to what they have to teach us today.
Great, thank you so much. We are delighted to be here. This CE course is something that we've been trying to kind of piece together based on the work that we've done in Excel over the years, and so we hope that it is something that you find useful, and we are also really excited to hear feedback from you about things that you're doing, visualizations you're creating, and ways that you're analyzing information. You'll have to be patient with us, not super familiar with Teams, so I'm going to attempt to share my screen and then also put this in presenter mode, so I may not see anyone after this. So let's just see. Okay. Can you all see the actual screen of the course?
Yes, we can, Karen.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Annette to get us started.
Excellent. Thanks, Karen. And welcome everyone to Charting a New Course, Practical Data Visualization for Librarians. Data visualization is used to communicate complex information and explore trends in large sources of data. Compelling data visualization requires thoughtful planning and execution, from understanding the data, choosing the right chart, balancing visual cues, and providing narratives to tell interesting stories. This course will give you a strong foundation in the principles of data visualization. In addition, we will use Microsoft Excel, a common but incredibly powerful tool, to visualize library relevant data through a series of hands-on activities. You'll gain practical and immediately useful skills for both visualizing qualitative and quantitative data. You guys have already heard our introduction, and thank you for that. Like Karen said, we use data visualization a lot, and you are more than welcome to reach out to us after the conference if you have questions or need any additional information from this presentation. So we'll start off today with a 30-minute lecture on the principles of effective data visualization, and then we're going to take a 5-minute break before heading into the Charting a New Course Excel workbook. We'll cover the sections on data cleaning, basic functions, and data manipulation. After a 10-minute break, we'll return to cover basic charts in Excel, and then we'll have about a 10-minute of breakout activity in small groups where you'll create different types of charts. We'll come back for discussion on formatting charts and close out our session with some time for questions. This schedule is also available if you guys need it on page 12 of the conference materials that were sent before the conference. Like we said, the course materials are available for download. They're on this slide and they're in the conference information as well. So get your coffee and tea ready because we're heading into principles of effective data visualization.
All right, so I think, Annette, do I have the next one too? Am I sharing that?
Yes.
So. Okay, good, because I'm not sure how to stop sharing. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and get my slide deck going here. So hopefully you can see the slide deck here. Welcome to the principles of effective data visualization. Data visualizations can make data more comprehensible, emphasizing trends and patterns that might otherwise be hard to detect. So in this presentation, we're going to focus on best practices and principles for data visualization. By the end of this short 35-minute session, you'll know different visual cues and how they help make meaning from data. You'll recognize the different types of charts that are available to be created. You'll hopefully feel comfortable with options for telling stories with data. And you'll recognize the importance of things like typography and color in data visualizations and understand the power and importance of just your visualizations overall. So one of the key aspects that's going to drive your decision making in which visualization you create is the type of data that you're working with. Though there are many types of data, today we're going to focus on two main types. So the first one is category data, and you can imagine that as data whose values describe some characteristic or category. And then the other type is quantity, and that's really just data that takes on these numerical values. So those are the two different pieces, category data and quantity data, and that's what you'll see as we move along. So when working to visualize data, there are visual cues we can use to decrease the cognitive load placed on our audience. That is the mental effort required to process and understand information. The chart on this slide represents category and quantity data, as well as textual information. The visual cues under each are listed from the type that is most likely to be interpreted correctly by viewers to those that are less likely to be interpreted correctly. So we're actually going to walk through some examples of this chart. So the first visual cue we will discuss is position. Position is equally effective for category data as it is for quantity. In the example provided, our mind can easily detect groups of similar items by their clustered positions in the category data Or for quantity data, we can detect the connection or movement of data based on its position in the chart. So even in the absence of other visual cues, our minds can quickly begin to make meaning from these two visualizations. So position is great for both. One way to enhance the visual cue of position is to use enclosures or connections. So our eyes are drawn to the enclosed data in both category and quantity. Enclosures cue viewers to pay special attention to those data points. The connections in the quantity data make it clear that these data are related. Color is another visual cue used in data visualization. For category data, one of the most accurate visual cues we can use is different color hues, or simply put, we can easily recognize that different color hues represent different categories. For quantity data, a less impactful but still useful visual cue related to color is the intensity of the color. This means that the different shades of a color can indicate different quantities. Overall, humans don't accurately perceive levels of quantity very well when it's indicated by color intensity, but it can still be a useful cue in conjunction with others. In the example on the left, we can identify which circles are similar by the color categories of yellow, green, and purple. In the example on the right, we can identify the intensity of the color must hold some type of information, where the color intensity would indicate a quantity or maybe even a category. Color in both hue and intensity is also useful as a visual cue for text. In this example, we are able to differentiate between the light and the dark gray text and the text that's in green. The visual cues narrows our focus to specific text of interest. Objects that are of similar shape are perceived as belonging to a similar group, which is why shape is a good visual cue for category data. It's not a recommended cue for quantity data, however. Very similar to using color and shape as a visual cue is using texture. Texture is a fairly accurate visual cue for category data, though too much texture can be a bit difficult for the mind to process. Texture can often be used as a supplemental visual cue with color to improve accessibility for colorblind users or to make charts readable in black and white. And we'll talk more about accessibility later in this presentation. Texture is not a recommended visual cue for quantity. Length or height of shape, usually a bar, is highly recommended as a visual cue for quantity data, as we can perceive quantity quite accurately using this cue. It's not a recommended visual cue for category data. One way to enhance length or height as a visual cue is to use a baseline, an average line, or a median line. The line acts as a visual cue to viewers to recognize when data is above or below a particular mark. Angles are a visual cue mainly for quantity data. They help to make comparisons by providing a sense of proportion. However, studies show that angles are much more difficult for our minds to evaluate than visual cues such as length or position. For that reason, it is easier to distort the data on a pie chart when compared to other charts. However, pie charts are as effective as bar or column charts unless there are more than 3 parts to a whole. So just the more angles you get in a chart, the less accurate it is. So if there are more than 3 parts to a whole, the angle is no longer an accurate visual cue. Though we can tell that there are many parts to this pie chart, we often can't tell accurately how much each part makes of the whole. So you might consider using a bar or column chart where the primary visual cue is length rather than angle. As we discussed, we are much better at processing and understanding length as a visual cue. While size is not the most accurately interpreted visual cue for quantity data, you'll often see it used. So here we see 2 examples of size being used to indicate quantity. The first is a tree map and the second is a bubble chart. We can often tell that a box or a bubble is larger or smaller than another, but we're not very good at telling how much larger or smaller they are. So even though it's not a very highly accurate visual cue, it is often a very visually appealing choice when depicting general proportion between 2 or more entities. Also, size is not a recommended visual cue for category data. Text has a few additional visual cues you can make use of, like size, spacing, and styling. In this example, your eyes might quickly go to the larger text that has been spaced out away from the main paragraph, as well as the italic style text at the beginning of the paragraph. With all of these visual cues to choose from, how can we figure out which cues we want to use? And how do we fit these cues into the right type of chart for our data? Well, a chart chooser will help you choose the best type of chart to display and format your data. Typically, the chart chooser will tell you the common name of the chart type, give you a description of it, a visual example, described when it's used, and what type of data the chart is best used for. So here we list 2 helpful chart choosers that might be of use to you. You may also find it helpful when choosing which charts to use to sketch your data visualization on paper before deciding on any particular chart or before heading into the data visualization tool. By doing this, you can quickly determine if you have the correct data or the best visualization in mind. Your sketches don't have to include real accurate data, but you should decide on which variables will be depicted in the X and Y axis and any visual cues that will help your audience make meaning from the visualization. So I'm just going to pause for a second to see if there's any questions on that first part of our presentation, which is to know different visual cues and how they help make meaning of data. And I cannot see the chat, so.
I am watching the chat, and you're welcome to put questions in the chat.
Okay, so if there are questions, we'll pick them up as we go along. So let's move on to recognizing the different types of charts that are available. So choosing a chart is a question of what you're trying to show with your data. Experiment with different charts to see which works best. You want a chart that demonstrates value and achieves its purpose in an easily recognizable way. Some of the visualization software you work with will suggest chart types for you to try. However, it's good to have a basic framework for you to prioritize particular chart types for particular tasks. So here's a basic chart chooser from a tool called Click, where they break out a basic list of charts into 4 groups. You've got comparison, composition, distribution, and relationship. Over the next few slides, we're going to cover several chart types, some that you see on this slide from Click, but each chart in ours was made using Microsoft Excel. You may want to use a different visualization software, and that's totally fine, and we'll discuss those options as well. So we're going to start with bar charts. So a bar chart or a bar graph is the basic representation of data in quantities. Here we show similar data on instruction sessions held from 2016 to 2020 and how they can look in a simple bar chart, a stacked bar chart, a clustered bar chart, and a 100% stacked bar chart. So it's the same information, just visualized slightly differently in using different charts. You can see how we've used the visual cue of length for quantity and color for category. A common use for a 100% stacked bar chart is to show survey responses from a Likert question where the categories show positive responses, neutral responses, or negative responses. And we'll go over an example of this in our hands-on session. A column chart is very similar to a bar chart, and it also represents data in quantities. So here we show similar data on reference questions answered from 2016 to 2020. And so we're using here a simple column chart, a stacked column chart, a clustered column chart, and a 100% stacked column chart. And you can see how we've used the visual cue of height for quantity and color for category. And some of these are nice if you can get the slide deck to download and really look at how these charts are showing the same thing just in a slightly different way. The overlapping column chart is good for comparing one set of columns to an underlying or nested set of columns. The nesting of the columns implies the relationship between these 2 points. Here we see the number of documents published each year and the number of those documents that have openly available associated data sets. Line charts are used to display trends over time, like years, months, or days, or categories when order is important. You can use the line chart to show many data points, which is helpful for longitudinal data sets where you have lots of points. Here we see 2 line charts and a stacked area chart on unique page views for the library website from 2014 to 2018. Occasionally combining two chart types is helpful, or using two different axes to display data. Here's an example of a combination of a line and bar chart, both using the same axis to show average number of users in library spaces, as well as the room capacity of those spaces. A pie chart is used to show proportions of a whole. You would use a pie chart to show numbers that related to a larger sum and always equal to 100%. Do not use this chart if it contains many slices or angles because that's hard to estimate. So the pie chart on this slide shows viewers of PubMed Central in 2012. Like a pie chart, a donut chart shows the relationship of parts to a whole, but a donut chart can contain more than one data series. Each data series that you plot in a donut chart adds a ring to the chart. The donut chart on this page only shows one ring, but it has categories of clinical questions answered in 2018. A scatter plot is used to plot numerical data on both the X and Y axis. Use a scatter plot when you have two numerical variables that pair well together. The scatter plot on this slide shows the number of documents published and the average citation impact scores of those documents for several universities. Bubble charts are similar to scatter plot, but also allow for a third variable to be charted as the size of the bubble. The bubble chart on this slide shows the average percentile rank of documents versus the average normalized category impact of those documents, and the bubbles are sized by the number of documents published in each subject area. Histograms are used to group data into ranges. The tall bar that shows that more data falls into that particular range. On this slide, we have a histogram of ranges of minutes needed to answer questions of medical residents. Slope charts are used to show developments between 2 points. So on this slide, the slope chart shows the increase in the number of user sessions for a database, both before and after a promotional news item was released about that database. A sunburst chart is used to display a hierarchical structure of data in circular form. Unlike the donut chart, the sunburst can show the relationships in that hierarchy. The sunburst chart on this slide shows topic areas, both macro, meso, and micro levels, so those 3 different levels of publications by the Public Health Department from 2018 to 2020. Tree maps are used to display a hierarchical view of data and make it easy to spot patterns. So the tree map here displays categories by color and proximity and can easily show lots of data, which would be difficult to show in other chart types. So the tree map here on this slide shows mesh terms for public health documents in 2018. The big number is about emphasizing the magnitude of a number. You can use a text box and font size and color to create this big number chart. The Sankey diagram emphasizes the major transfers or flows within a system, and they help locate the most important contributions to that flow. So the Sankey diagram on this slide shows faculty expertise in clinical research areas. A Venn diagram uses overlapping circles to illustrate similarities, differences, and relationships between concepts, ideas, categories, groups. And so those can be really helpful for visualizing data. A Corepleth map displays divided geographical areas or regions that are colored, shaded, or patterned in relation to a data variable. This provides a way to visualize values over a geographic area, which can show variations or patterns across the displayed location. Finally, some information might be better displayed in tables than in data visualization. So if you're using a table to display less than 3 columns of data, you might not actually even need a table at that point. You might just be able to put it in the text. So think about that. You also have tables and text that you can use. And then on this slide are some good characteristics of tables. So there are many tools available for data visualization. This table shows some of the advantages and challenges for Excel, Google Charts, Python or R, and Tableau. Note that if you're most familiar with Excel, there really are a lot of advanced charts that you can make right inside Excel that many people are not aware of. The link on this slide takes you to a great resource called How to Build Data Visualizations in Excel. Other tools that aren't listed here but you might hear in this space are Click and Data Wrapper. Okay, so now that we've talked about recognizing different types of chart, are there any questions?
Karen, there was a request for you to slow down a little bit. And then what was the name of the second chart chooser that you just recommended?
Okay, so the chart choosers, sorry, they're at the beginning here, so we're going to go back. And these slides are all available if you just copy that DOI. Oops. So the one that we've shown a picture of here is Click. This is the URL is in the slide, and if you want, you also have this Juice Analytics chart chooser and the data visualization catalog.
Perfect. And I've put the links into the chat. The links to your slides and everything are in the chat, so people should be able to find them easily.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes. And all of the text that I have that I'm talking about is also in there. So in the slide deck. So we encourage you, if you ever want to give a presentation on this, if this is an area of interest to you, you can use the slide deck. We allow for reuse. So, okay, so we're going to move on to really kind of feeling comfortable with some of the different options you have for telling stories with data. So data storytelling is the process of communicating information usually tailored to fit a specific audience with compelling text and visualization. Today, we're going to cover 3 versions of storytelling that you may want to employ for your project. So these are annotation, narration, and story. Please keep in mind that these are not mutually exclusive. You can have both story and annotation, or aspects of narration that begin and end with a story. When you tell stories with data, you can blend elements of text and visualization, really whatever you need to suit your purposes. So the first way to tell stories with your data is to focus on annotation. In fact, annotation out of all 3 options focuses the most on the data visualization itself. The purpose of annotation is to help your audience understand the content and purpose of each visualization. With annotation, you can see poignant chart titles and informative legends. So in this graphic on the slide, you'll see Stephanie Evergreen's advice for annotation. The answer for the question, so what, goes in the place of the title, and the visual evidence that supports that point is the data visualization itself. So really think about that, making your titles very poignant. There are other 2 really helpful aspects of annotation are the use of call-out boxes and sidebars. Call-out boxes bring attention and are usually very brightly colored. Sidebars are where you can offload supporting material or context for the visualization. They aren't primarily used for attention getting. Their colors are muted and the font is closer to that paragraph style. And so next we're going to look at several examples of annotated data visualizations. Okay, so this visualization focuses on the answer to the question, so what, by replacing the title of the chart with this statement. There was an 88% increase in published documents from 2016 to 2017 with the addition of new staff. The sidebar indicates why this data is important. The rise in published documents indicates we have increased our capacity to do research and our ability to communicate our research to our community. And so that's just a different, like a little change you can make to your graphic to kind of think about annotation as a way to tell the story of your data. The second example of annotation shows a chart with a traditional title, so what you might expect to see, but some well-placed color bars as a legend, and then a sidebar that focuses on answering, what does this tell us? And this is a nice way to annotate the visualization because the viewer can compare with what they see in the visualization to the information that you're telling them that they should see. The example, this example is similar to the previous one in that the sidebar explains what the viewer can see in the graph. However, in this sidebar, there's also some contextual information that really can't be known from the visualization. So it tells you that our highest staffing hours are from 10:30 to 3:30 p.m., but that coincides with only 35% of visits by our patrons on average. So it's kind of giving you a little bit of information about what you want them to know from this chart. This particular example of annotation makes use of color, hue, and intensity and that text size to answer that so what question. So it says our teaching is effective. And then it describes what you can see in this chart. Attendee scores increased by 72% on average from pre-test to post-test in our database information sessions. So the next option for telling stories with data is narration. Narration splits the focus between the text and the data visualization. The purpose of narration is to guide the reader through two or more visualizations, starting sharing how these visualizations are connected, providing context about the data, and keeping the audience interests and needs in mind. Narration doesn't quite rise to the level of story, as we'll cover next, but it does focus much more on text than just those small annotations. So examples of narration include infographics, maybe conference posters, and annual reports. Sometimes data dashboards will employ narration, but more often than not, data dashboards are just generally well annotated charts. So here are some examples. So in this example, the narration provides contextual information as an overview, and then the visualizations are annotated, but much of that information has been moved right into the narrative. The narrative helps audiences make connections between the charts, but notice that the narrative is simply that, a description of the visualizations and any contextual information the audience might find helpful. The final type of storytelling is aptly named story. The main focus of the story is on the text, though data is used to support the text. The story usually follows an arc from beginning, middle to end. There is usually an element of emotion, and the ending is meaningful to the audience and generally includes a call to action for the reader. This type of storytelling is often used in outreach and marketing materials, and you may also see it in annual reports. Using story can be particularly effective if you're trying to sway the minds of decision makers. So we would be remiss if we didn't mention that story comes in several types. Those types are listed here. Generally, like what you will see, things like overcoming and the quest, or a tragedy or rebirth. And so if you're familiar with storytelling, these might sound familiar to you. So here we see an example of a story being employed by the Lupus Foundation of America to share the results of an awareness survey that they conducted with the general public. So the story has elements of tragedy and overcoming. So the first part of the story informs us of the tragedy, that there's an estimated 1.5 million Americans that have some form of lupus, and that it's mysterious and devastating disease. They use some simple visualizations to explain how deeply people living with lupus are impacted by the disease. Next, they share another tragedy, which is the lack of awareness, and they emphasize that their survey indicates 63% of Americans have never heard of lupus. But then we also see triumph, right, in this story. Thankfully, the lupus advocates are leading the way. In 2021, Congress approved $21.5 million for lupus-specific programs, more than has ever been approved before. And then now we see at the end of the report the triumph. The increase in funding is thanks to their advocates who employed every method to advocate for lupus funding in Congress. And their call to action is implied that continued advocacy will bring continued awareness and funding. So this is an incredibly moving story, as it should be, but it isn't just a story in the theoretical sense. It is real life for so many people. And we can see how that use of story can be so impactful along with data and some simple visualizations, and why it's important to consider using story when you're working with your data. So we're going to pause a moment for some questions before we move on to recognizing design. Importance of design.
There's nothing in the chat, Karen.
Okay, we'll keep going. All right, so taking time to focus on your audience helps you figure out what content and messages they care about. Focusing on your audience also helps you decide on the appropriate tone and voice for your message. So you kind of want to consider these questions. Who is the audience or decision maker, and what do you know about them? What background information is relevant or essential for them to know or understand your data? What biases does our audience have that might make them supportive of or resistant to our message? And what data is available that would strengthen our case? And what would a successful outcome look like? As we mentioned with previous slide deck, we had information about conference posters, but you should consider the needs of all audiences, especially those who have low vision or blindness, experience dyscalculia, have low numerical literacy, have poor contrast vision, are colorblind and cannot differentiate between certain colors. Maybe they use a device with monochrome display, or maybe they're using a print copy that's black and white. All of these sorts of things we have to think about with design for our audiences. For some audiences, data visualizations need to have enough contrast, specifically a contrast ratio of at least 7:1 between foreground elements, and which are the text or images, and the background elements like colors and watermarks and things like that. Insufficient contrast will cause some audiences difficulty as they read your content. You should never use color alone to convey important information in visualizations. For online data visualizations, make sure alternative text, referred to as alt text, is displayed with the visualizations. Good alt text includes one sentence of what the chart is, including the chart type for users with limited vision who may only see part of it. It should also include a link to a CSV or other machine readable data format so that people with impaired vision can tab through the chart data with their screen reader. For all visualizations, you should use clear and concise titles and legends that explain the importance of the visualization, as well as how to understand at least one point of the visualization. So once you've completed your annotations and your narration or your story, and you've focused your message on your audience, and you've kind of looked at your contrast and your color, making sure everything fits for the audiences that you're looking for, you might want to consider decluttering, like taking a step back. So decluttering means to reduce the amount of information being presented so that your visualizations don't appear more complicated than necessary. Because trust me, as you go through this process, you're going to start adding. You want to take a moment to think about what you could cut out. So complicated visualizations can increase that cognitive load for your audience, which really means that you're increasing the mental effort that's required to really take in that information. So on this slide is an example of a very cluttered visualization. I like all of the data points, but man, there's a lot going on there. So here's the same information, but displayed differently. So a couple things I changed. I changed the chart type. You'll want to use the most impactful chart type for your message. So I changed the chart from this overlapping bar chart to 100% stacked bar chart to really better show that significant increase in documents that have been published in this with data sets in this repository since it was implemented. I removed the chart border. So you'll want to remove any visual elements that aren't specifically necessary. I softened the grid lines. You can leave grid lines in charts if you find it helpful. Some people say take them out, but I think it's helpful sometimes for understanding the data and kind of recognizing where different percentages are. So I just felt they were helpful to have in there, and I did leave them. I removed the data markers. So data markers are helpful, but I just felt that the overall percentages with the grid lines were enough to kind of cue people as to when one percentage was better or bigger, larger than another. I did use a different legend. So I'm not able to label my data correctly, but I was able to rework the legend and use a pattern background so that I'm not just relying on color alone to distinguish percent documents with open data sets and those without. So you can see that I used a little color and texture there. And then I did remove the axis labels because year and percent aren't really good explanations in and of themselves. I decided they didn't have to be there. But before removing axis labels, make sure your audience has sufficient information elsewhere to know what they're looking at. And then while decluttering, you should also consider the amount of white space, or more specifically, blank space that you have in your visualizations or surrounding your visualizations. Space in visual communication is as important as pauses in public speaking. Remember that your margins should remain free of text and visuals, and you should use appropriate sizing for visualizations and not like stretch them to fit the space. You know, really think about how big they need to be in the space that they're going to fill. In order to keep data visualizations consistent and readable, you'll want to consider several aspects related to font. Consider using sans serif fonts, which are fonts without extending features. And so they're kind of seen as clean and crisp for legibility. Depending on the amount of text, you should consider using only one font style. Also, sentence case, which uses both upper and lower case, is easier for people to read. The eye is able to pause on each capital letter that it encounters. You should consider sentence case for titles of your visualizations. Okay, one more stop or pause for questions before we move on to our last little bit here.
Yeah, Karen, there's a question in the chat about how do you put in the alt text. Do you want to talk about that now, or?
Yeah, so I will just make mention, for instance, if you're on Twitter or I think on Facebook too, they actually have a moment for you to put it in there. Like it'll say, well, do you have alt text for this? A lot of times people skip it. They don't put it in there. So make sure that you use that if you're putting your visualizations online. If there's a functionality for it, take the time to do it because it is really important.
Excellent. Susan, did that answer your question?
What if you're, would that work for any type of online? You said Twitter or Facebook, but in just like, you know, like a internal intranet page or something like that?
Oh, I see. So I think it probably depends on whatever kind of website you're running. So you would want to maybe talk to whoever, like we don't use SharePoint, but if you might want to just talk to whoever runs your website if you can put alt text in there. It should be part of the web framework that you're using. There should be the ability to do that. That's a great question, and we can try to add more information into our future classes on this regarding alt text.
That's all that's in the chat, Karen.
Okay, great. So let's move on to understanding the power and importance of data visualizations. So at the heart of data visualizations are some very prominent guiding principles regarding ethics. And here we will see this unofficial Hippocratic oath for data visualization, which asks the reader to respect the great power visualization has in garnering wisdom and misleading the uninformed. So as the oath emphasizes, one of the most important principles is to respect that power, to faithfully represent data. There are many ways to be untruthful or manipulate a data visualization, and over the next few slides we're going to cover examples of untruthful data visualizations. So one of the easiest ways to mislead a viewer in a data visualization is changing or manipulating the x-axis or y-axis of a bar graph, line graph, or scatter plot. So in 2014, the New York Times carried an article on American military spending in Europe with the graph on the left. The problem, as several people pointed out, was that the first 5 dates on the x-axis covered a 45-year period, and the last 5 dates covered just 12 years, giving a very strange sense of the time scale. A nonprofit fact-checking group called Full Fact noted the misrepresentation and produced their own version of the chart by approximating the dates represented in the Times version. And you can see there's quite a striking difference that might lead you to some different conclusions about the information between the two charts. In most cases, the y-axis should represent ranges from 0 to a maximum value. However, sometimes those ranges are changed to emphasize a trend in the data. In the chart on the left, the y-axis does not begin at 0 and conveys a vast difference between interest rates in 2008 and 2012. And that can kind of be confusing to the viewer if they don't realize that you're not starting at 0. With a more accurate y-axis at 0, we can clearly see that there's actually very little difference between those years. If, however, the small changes meant big impacts, and that's really what the chart on the left is trying to indicate, then a good legend or some descriptive text would be important to cue the viewer in as to what they're seeing. Cherry picking means only using data that represents a particular position and ignoring a significant portion of related data that may contradict that position. On the left, we see a graph of climate temperature data. By showing only data from 1998 to 2012, it seems there's an artificial pause or only a slightly overall increase in temperature between those years. But showing the entire data set from 1800 to 2012, which can be seen in the chart on the right, we can see that there's definitely an ongoing warming trend of these temperatures over time. So sometimes in our desire to simplify the data, especially if it's a really complex visualization, we may choose a graphic that is incorrect or nonsensical to our purpose. So on the left, we see an infographic from Business Week in 2007 about the vintage ratings for Cabernet Sauvignon between 1990 and 2005. The shape of the graphics, the color, and the labeling really makes it difficult to tell what the graphic means. On the right is a slightly better reworked chart showing the same information a little bit more clearly in now a line chart. Though we've kept the color scale and other information the same. So it's still a lot of information to convey, but it's a little bit more understandable that we see time across the bottom and we see the scores changing in the line chart, and that the colors mean something particular in that sense. So our brains are wired to expect certain things in a data visualization. In this example of the chart on gun deaths in Florida, we see in the chart on the left what appears to be a decrease in gun deaths overall from the early 1990s to the mid-2010s, beginning when Florida enacted its Stand Your Ground law. But when we examine the chart more closely, we see that the y-axis is actually flipped upside down, and the red portion of the chart is actually the data. So we would not have expected to see data upside down. And on the right, we see a version of the chart flipped back to the conventional way of viewing data. Finally, you can use a data visualization checklist to make use of the ideas and concepts that we shared in this presentation. And I'm sharing this really great checklist by Stephanie Evergreen and Ann K. Emery. It's a guide for the development of high impact data visualizations, and it's really helpful. So you can use the checklist to rate each aspect of your visualization, including things related to text, arrangement, color, lines, and overall appearance. And before we end this portion of our class today, I just want to say that there are some other really great presentations on this topic, one by Chris Beltler and one by Shonda Hunt. All right, any overall questions before we just take a short break and jump into our charting of a new course workbook?
There's nothing else in the chat, Karen. I don't know if anyone else wanted to just, turn their mic on real quick and ask a question.
This is Sarah. I just had a quick question. I noticed that like the Click program required a subscription, and I just wondered, are there some available that don't require subscriptions, or if they do require subscriptions, do you think it's worth it?
That's a good question. So I think that there's a lot you can do in Microsoft Excel. So if you have that, you might want to consider just seeing what you can do there first. Data Wrapper, which is another one that we didn't put in that chart, but is still something that's available online, is free. You do have to have there are paid versions of it, but overall, just the general charts you can make are free. I've never used Click. I put it in here because it is rapidly becoming a tool that people are using kind of competition with Tableau. And there is Tableau Public, which is a free version. The only thing I would say with that is that then your data is openly available too, which isn't super helpful all the time. Awesome. Thanks, Francis, for sharing the Data Wrapper link. I wish we had more time to debate and discuss that because it would be really interesting. Annette, how are we doing on time? Do we need to move into our workbook? I think we might.
I had a question real quick.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about the word charts? I always forget the proper names of them, but when they have like one really big word and then the small words around it, like the word clusters.
Oh, the word clouds or things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So size, just like when we were talking about tree maps and bubble charts, size, we're not all that great at determining like we can see something's larger than something else, right? If there's a big difference. And so people have really criticized word clouds because they're like, well, you know, if you got two words that are closely the same size, you're really not telling that if there is a difference between them or not. And I would just argue, though, that sometimes in data visualization, we're actually looking for ways to engage our audience, to draw them in, to be interested in something. And so the visualization itself doesn't always have to be the most accurate for our eyes. We certainly don't want to be misleading, but if it's going to draw people in, and then you have the real data kind of like in a text box, or you're pointing to things in the chart, you're annotating your chart really well, I think it's fine to use them. So, you know, and we have like faculty members here who request them for things that I'm like, in their grant submissions, I'm always like, maybe not for a grant submission, but good for like annual reports or just something where you're just really trying to draw people in real quick, because they are stunning. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Karen, we are a little over on time. I don't know if people need a break though, just to grab a cup of coffee or use the restroom or something. It's up to you. What do you think?
I think we're going to have to jump right in, unfortunately, just because the PowerPoint list is not the one. We might need to get you a different, I think I checked the DOI. If you just hyperlink the DOI, it should take you to Digital Hub. Okay. So we're going to jump into the next session, and I think, Annette, you're going to share your screen.
Correct.
So this is what we're heading into is charting a new course, and I apologize because thank you, Francis, is going to look for the PowerPoint. This was meant to be like a much longer class, so we're just going to go through a few bits and pieces of this. But if you want to, and you're thinking, oh, what they're going through is a little too basic for me, feel free to jump to other sections and kind of work your way through it. That's completely fine. But you are welcome to just follow along on our screen. If you want to open it on yours and kind of do some of the practice activities, that's fine too. We just want to get through as much as we can, but let you know that there are other parts that we just don't have time to cover just because of the amount of time we have today. So the Charting a New Course Practical Data Visualization Excel Workbook is based on Microsoft Excel 2016 on a Windows computer. So you might not have that version, and you might not have a Windows computer. So to find your version of Excel, you're going to want to click on File and then select your account, and that will show you what version you have. So you can see Annette has this Microsoft Office Professional Plus. And so what we've done for all of these different sections is we've mentioned which versions of Excel these are true for. So if you're not able to find something that we're showing, it's possibly that it's not available for your version of Excel. Okay, so we're going to jump into getting to know Excel. We're going to start here on our first one. So getting to know Excel covers a few basic tips on navigating the workbook and basic features that you need when you're working with data. So this is just to orient ourselves here, because we want to make sure that we're getting everybody together on the same page. So navigating the Excel ribbon in Workbook, page 1. There are 7 or more tabs called ribbons in Excel, which contain multiple commands divided into groups. So File allows you to jump into that backstage view that contains all the essential file-related commands and Excel options. Data holds the commands for managing the worksheet data, as well as connecting to external data and things like that. As you're looking at your workbook, one of the really important things that you're going to want to know is how to zoom in and out. And there is a zoom slider that Annette will probably use throughout this. You can watch her down there at the bottom, zooming in and out. You can also use the little plus button, and she'll show you kind of where that is and move her mouse around a bit so you can see it, to add a new worksheet or to copy an existing worksheet. So there she is. She just made a new one. Okay, so we're going to go to page 2. We're also going to talk about how you can fill adjacent cells. This is really helpful to know in Excel. So you can quickly copy text or formulas into adjacent cells by dragging what's called the fill handle. So to review and practice using that fill handle, you're going to place your cursor in the cell you want to use to fill other cells. And you'll notice a small square at the bottom right-hand corner of your cursor. If you click on that small square and drag it down, you will see this fill. For month, Excel assumes that you want to fill down each month of the year. To prevent this from happening, you would just want to type, like if you just wanted it all January, you would just type January in 2 cells, highlight both of those cells, and then use the fill down feature. For year, Excel will fill down with the same year. If you want to see a series of years, then next to the cell, fill the next cell with the next year, highlight both cells, and then Excel will understand that you're trying to go year by year. And so you can see Annette doing that there. Okay, so that's a little bit of information on just fill and what you might need to know there. We are next going to cover page 3, which is adjusting columns or rows, kind of a helpful thing to know how to do. So Excel offers many options for formatting the layout of a worksheet. You can adjust columns or rows, hide or unhide columns or rows, insert them, auto-fit the width and height, or delete them. And so we're just going to talk about how you would format the width of a column to the largest cell. So you're going to highlight the data in the column labeled unit sales. And in the Home tab, in the Cells section, choose the Format menu. And then choose Auto Fit and then Auto Fit Column Width. Right? And so that really sets that width of the column to the largest data item that you have. To quickly set the width of a column, you can also right click on the selected column and click on column width and type the value that you want. But I always like it to do the auto fit for me so I don't have to guess what number I should enter in there. Okay, so that is all about adjusting columns and rows. And now we're going to go to the next one, which is styling and formatting for cells. So Excel offers several options for styling and formatting cells. So if you would like to remove borders from the inside of the table, for example, you would highlight the cells that you want to change the borders of. And then in the Home tab, in the Font section, there's a drop-down Borders button. And then you would click on the borders that are of interest to you. And in this case, no borders is what you'd want to choose. Okay, so we've removed the borders, or you can add them back in. Another thing that's helpful to know, especially if you're working with money, is to be able to format something as currency. So in this case, you would highlight the cells that you want to change into the currency format, and they might actually be there, but in the Home tab in the Number section, you'd click on that little $sign, and it'll change it to currency, and you might have to increase the size. There we go. So now they're actually in the currency. And you can increase or decrease the decimal places. So you would just want to highlight the unit sales, for example, and in the Home tab, in that Number section again, you can see that you can change the decimal places with that particular little button that Annette is clicking on there. Okay, so the other thing that is kind of good to know, a little functionality that's really helpful in Excel, is selecting non-adjacent columns of data. So there's just a lot of keyboard shortcuts that you can use in Excel. You probably don't, if you learn them all, you probably don't even need a mouse. But one of the things that we find most helpful is being able to select non-adjacent cells. So let's say that you want to highlight year and professional presentations because you're creating a chart of just those 2 pieces of data. So you're going to highlight the first column and then hold down the Control key and keep holding down the Control key while you highlight the second column of data. And that way you're just highlighting those 2 columns and not every column or every cell in your workbook. Okay, so those were just some quick exercises to get us all on the same page with some of the things that we'll need as we move forward. So we're going to move into the basics of data cleaning. We unfortunately won't be able to cover everything in this particular tab, but this covers some tools for identifying incomplete or inaccurate parts of data and then replacing, modifying, or improving data. So we're going to start on page 2, selecting and treating blank cells. So there is a great command called the go-to special command that will help you quickly find and select cells that contain specific types of data, such as blank cells. Now, those of you really familiar with Excel will say, well, there's lots of different ways to do this. So we're just going to cover one way, where you can identify blank cells and then you can delete them or you can edit their content. Why would you want to do this? So really quickly, just a little side note here. For instance, when you're using something like an average function, it's automatically going to ignore blank cells and cells containing text value. And if you don't want those blank cells ignored, you want them to be part of your average, you're going to want to fill them in with a 0. Or maybe you're interested in sorting your data and just highlighting the blank cells so you can add in the text not available or something, just make sure that everyone is aware that that cell isn't blank, it actually isn't available, that data is not available. You'd want to use this to do that. So, but note as we go into that go-to special, there's other options available too. So just keep note of that. Okay, so to practice adding text to blank cells, you're going to highlight the entire data set that you're interested in, or a column or whatever it is. In this case, it's just a little piece of data. In the Home tab, click on Find and Select. It's way off to the right. You're going to choose Go to Special. And then you're going to select in there. Notice there's lots of options in here, so there's different things you can do, but you're going to click on Blanks and then click OK. This selects all the blank cells in your data set. So if you want to enter 0 or not available in all these cells, just type your text in the first cell there and then press Control Enter. If you only press Enter, the value is just inserted into that active cell. You Control Enter, it's going to insert it into all. So you can see now she's got 0, or she could have put not available as well in there. Okay, so that's selecting and treating blank cells. That's really helpful when you have some messy data you're trying to figure out what's going on with. The next thing we're going to cover is page 4, Consolidate. So go to page 4, Consolidate. So when you consolidate data, you assemble data so that it can be more easily updated and aggregated as necessary. So you can consolidate data within a single list, or if you have data on different worksheets, you can also do that. And you'll see that as we're working through how that's possible. So we're just going to practice with a simple consolidation of a list that's going to provide a count for each item in that list. So to practice consolidating data, here we have a list of journals, and we have a count 1 next to them, but we know that there's duplicates in here. We just want to consolidate to see what is our final count of how many times a journal is listed in this list. So to practice using Consolidate, you would want to copy and paste the column headers of the data that's being consolidated, paste it next to it, and then you're going, or somewhere in this case, go ahead and paste. There we go. Then you're going to place your cursor in the first column where you want the final data to show. In that case, it's under journal title. And so in the Data tab, in the Data Tools group, you're going to click on Consolidate. So you can see she's gone to Data, and then she's clicked on Consolidate. You will want, when you see this, to choose the sum function. Annette, are you? Just want to make sure that she's still there.
Oh, you can't. Can you see the pop-up menu?
Nope, we can't see it. I don't see it. So.
Oh, I wonder. Yeah, I am doing it, but here, let me try it again.
Okay. Oh no, is this a Teams thing where you can't see pop-ups?
I
Yeah.
don't see pop-up, but I saw her mouse moving.
Okay.
Yeah, I have the pop-up open. I guess you must not be able to see it.
That's so strange. Okay, well, if you can just show the example, because we do have it there. So when you, so if you scroll down, we do have screenshots.
Oh yeah, here.
Okay, so when you're in Consolidate, you will see a pop-up button come up, And you will want to choose the sum function, because at this point we're just summing them. We want to count. And in the reference box, you're actually going to select the range of cells that you're interested in consolidating and then add them to that box. And this is where if you had data from additional tabs, you can keep adding ranges into that box. In this case, we just want, in this, it's like R169 through S193. And then check that you want to count based on the left column and click OK. And then Annette, if you want to show the results of you doing that.
Okay.
Note that Consolidate's going to work using an exact match. So if your journals had slightly different abbreviations or something, then you're going to get a count for each one. So. And we joked that Annette's kind of our Vanna White in this situation. She's going through the process of it. Now, we can't really see what you're doing, so.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
I apologize. It's hanging up weird. I don't know why.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move on. That might be something you'll have to practice on your own there. Okay, so we're going to go to page 6, which is parsing data using text to column. So sometimes you want to parse data from one cell to multiple columns, and occasionally when you get data maybe from a database, all of that data may be cramped into cells in one row, and you really just want to parse it out into multiple columns. You can use the text to column functionality in Excel. So highlight the data that you want to parse, and then in the data tab and the data tools group, click on text to column, and that's going to open the text to column wizard. So hopefully we can see it.
It's open on my screen. You probably can't.
Oh, I wonder if this is a Teams thing, because at Zoom it works okay. All right. Yeah. So why don't you just scroll down so that they can see what the wizard looks like in our example. Okay, so in text to column, you're going to select the data type. So it's delimited in this case. The data is actually delimited by tabs. If it's not equally spaced, you might have to use a different option here. So select the delimiter, that's the character that separates your data, and you can select a predefined delimiter, or in that options button, if you have something other text that you want to put in there, you can do that. And then you'll select the data format and the destination cell. If the destination cell is the same as where the data resides, it's really just going to overwrite your data. So you can, and then you'll click finish. So Annette, why don't you walk through that? Even though we can't see your steps, we'll be able to see what you've done. And so we're going to text the column wizard she has open, and you'll just. There we go. So now it has separated out the data for us, but we couldn't see the wizard. That's fun. Okay. It's a good thing we have screenshots in our book. Okay, so now we're going to go to page 7, which is using a new feature in Excel called Get and Transform. So here's an example of a search strategy, and maybe you want to actually look at each one of those terms in their own row in a column, right? You just want to analyze each term. But right now they're all in one cell, and how do you separate them out? Well, you can use the text to rows feature in a new thing called Get and Transform. Okay, so you're going to use what's called the Power Query tool in Excel. And so how you do this is you're going to select the data that you want to parse. In the data tab, in the Get and Transform group, you're going to say, okay, we need to first create a table. And a table is a very specific thing in Excel, and it looks a certain way. And you'll see in a minute what a table looks like. So once you do this, it's going to open the Create Table wizard from Table. There we go. And okay, let's hope we can see this. Okay, so now
can you see that?
Make sure we do. We see the Power Query editor. So you're one step ahead of us. So okay. Make sure the data that you want to work with is still selected once you opened that Create Table wizard. And then if it is, select OK. If it isn't, go ahead and go back and select that cell and then click OK. And that will open the Power Query Editor. In the Home tab, in the Transform group, click on Split Column. Okay, you see that split column there? And by delimiter, we actually have a delimiter here. It's our OR. And so in the split column by delimiter wizard will open, and you're going to use these parameters. So select or enter delimiter, it's going to be custom. So in that drop down, it's custom. All right, and then your text, your custom text is OR. It's the word OR. And then you're going to want to split at each occurrence of the delimiter. And in the advanced options, you're going to choose rows. You don't want columns, you want rows. And then click OK. All right, so now you see your data there. How do you get it back into Excel? So what you want to do is close and load. So you want to close the wizard and load it. So click on close and load, and it's going to open a new tab, and it's going to create a table with your data. That is what table formats look like in Excel. And there is now your search strategy all separated out. All right. So now we're going to move on to the basics of functions. So that was data cleaning. Now we're going to move to functions. All right. So functions in Excel cover some of those common functions for performing calculations or manipulating data. So in Excel, a function is a built-in equation, and a formula is more of a user-defined equation. But both are tools that can perform calculations, return information, manipulate the contents of other cells, test conditions, and more. In Excel, a function and a formula, both of them, they start with an equal sign, and then the cells being referenced are surrounded by parentheses. And to complete or run a function, you need to press enter. So in practice, you're going to hear function and formula used interchangeably, so don't worry too much about the differences. And so if you want to really look at all of the functions that are available in Excel, in the Formulas tab, select Insert Function, and then you can use the search box to find all of the functions of interest and their definitions. And we do see that pop-up one, Annette. So yay, we're back to seeing it. Okay, so we're going to go next to page 2 in this workbook, because when you're dealing with functions, you have to recognize that Excel looks at your references to cells as either absolute or relative. And this is kind of important as you're working on this. So by default in Excel, a cell reference is just a relative reference, which means that the reference is relative to the location of the cell. Typically, a relative cell reference is exactly what you need. For example, if you drag the formula equals B4 into cell C4, then it's going to adjust itself to C4. Okay, so it's just relative. It's like you're in this cell, that's the cell you're referencing. You're in this cell, that's the cell you're referencing. However, if you want to maintain the original cell reference, you have to use the $sign, and that's when we get into this thing called absolute referencing. So the $sign before the column letter and the $sign before the row number. So if you want to, for instance, copy this formula equals B, $sign B, $4 into cell C4, the formula is going to stay $sign B, $sign 4. It's like you're sticking it. You're saying, even if I move this, I still want it to reference B4. So let's get an example of that. So to practice relative and absolute cell references, I want you to place your cursor in the total average sales. Okay. Notice that there's a sum function already existing there, and it's references. So it's referencing Q36 through Q41, right? Okay, so drag the sum function into the total yearly sales, and then look at it. So notice how the relative cell references in the sum functions change. So now we're looking at R36 through R41. So now I want you to change the sum function in that average sales to using those $signs before the column and the row. So put in a $sign before the Q, and a $sign before the 36, and a $sign before Q, and $sign before 41. And now I want you to drag it over and look at that. It stayed Q36 and through Q41. So that's important to know if you need to retain a column or a row specific information, that you've got to put the $sign before that. And you'll see an example moving forward how that's helpful. Okay, so the other thing we're going to talk about is on page 5. Or was it, I can't remember that. Is it page 5 or is it, I think we changed the numbers. Was it page 3? It's 3. Sorry, we've kind of changed some of our numbers around here. So some commonly used functions. So here's just some common ones that you might see. Sum, average, median, count, min, and max. So let's practice doing average and median. So you're going to place your cursor in the cell where you want the eventual results of that function to show. In this case, it's the average under December 2018. So you're going to type in your function for the average, and you're going to reference the group of cells that you want the average of. So average is average, and in this case, Annette, I think you went up and you searched for average. You drag your cursor down, so now you're referencing the cells that you want, and then you hit enter to run the function. You can use that fill adjacent technique that we talked about to drag the function across. So if you want to see the average of each month, and you can drag it over, and now you can see the average of each month. And you can keep using this if you, for instance, you want to do median, same function or same process, except for the function's different. It's median. So Annette goes in, she found the median function, and she'll have to get the right reference in there. And then she can drag it across to get that median. We do have some definitions there. If you're not very familiar with the difference between median and average, you can kind of look through those definitions. Okay, because we're trying to get to visualizations, but we want to kind of talk about how you shape and manipulate your data to get there. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the basics of data manipulation. And so this is the process for adjusting data and making it organized and easier to analyze. So one of our favorite functions is called Vlookup, and it's super powerful. And unfortunately, our example here is all on one tab, but you can imagine you have different tabs of data and you're trying to find data from different things. And what was this and where do I find this? You can use Vlookup. So Vlookup is when you need to find things in a table or arranged by row. For example, you want to find an automotive part, you have a list of part numbers, and you have all this data about automotive parts, and you want to find some information based on your part number, or find an employee based on their employee ID. So Vlookup does what we call a left look. That'll make sense once we show you it, and returns information from the right. So in its simplest form, Vlookup is a function, and it says, what do you want to look up, the range where you want to look for it, the column number you want returned in that range, and whether or not you want it to be based on an approximate or exact match. So we're going to practice a Vlookup here. Okay, so you've got this big journal information table. It's on its own tab. Let's say it's huge. It's got lots of information in it. And someone says to you, I would like to know the title and the publisher for these 4 journals. And they give you the IDs. And so what you can do is a Vlookup to pull that information in really quickly and fast, so that you don't have to go searching and like highlighting and such like that. So in the title tab, or title, put your cursor in there. So that's where you want the results to show. And you're going to type in the function for Vlookup. So it's equals Vlookup. And thanks, Annette, for showing us the nice wizard. Okay, there we go. So what goes inside of there? The first cell referenced is the title ID. So that's what you want to look up. So you want to look up that title ID. And then the next is where do you want to look for it? So you need to reference the entire journal table that you want to look at. So you can see Annette's just going to drag it all in there and put it in there. Okay. So now you've referenced that. And then the third is what column of data do you want returned? And that's based on counting from 1. So 1, column 2. You want returned column 2 in this case, because title is in column 2. So you want information from column 2. Once they find a match, you want information from column 2 returned. And then the fourth reference is, do you want it to be an exact match, that title ID, or do you want it to be approximate? In this case, you want it to be exact. It has to be exact ID that you're looking for. So you're going to put in that case, true, 1. So, or
false. To find an exact match, it has to be false or 0.
Thank you. Yes, false, 0. Exact match. Yes, thank you. Okay, so it found cancer epidemiology. That was a lot of work to type in that whole formula or that whole function, right? Vlookup. So wouldn't it be nice if she could just drag that down and it would work? It will, except remember what we learned about absolute and relative reference. We need to go in and absolute the table reference because we don't want those rows and columns and numbers to change as you drag down. The table itself exists where it is. We don't want that to change. So Annette's going to go into that reference and she's going to put in her $signs to make sure that doesn't change as we drag. There you go. Okay, so now she can go ahead and just drag that down. And now she's got all of those IDs right there. Okay, so you can do the same with publisher. Just remember what you want it to return is a different column number. So it's actually column number 9 in your table. So you start with title ID is 1 and then you count over and it's 9. So yes, Vlookup is incredibly helpful. We use it a lot. All right. And I tell you, I have to talk myself through Vlookup. It's like, what do I want to look up? Where do I want to look it up? What column number do I want? Do I want it to be exact or absolute? I have to like walk myself through that each time. All right. How's it going? There we go. It looks like Annette's got a pretty good, there we go. Okay. So that unfortunately is all we have time to cover in basics of data manipulation in Excel. But there are some other really great options here for looking at using VLOOKUP with a nested formula, an if statement. And then the one that we don't have time to go over, but super fun, is pivot tables. So take a moment to look at that and kind of use some of the practice data sets we have for that. Okay, so we're supposed to take a short break, and I'm not entirely sure that we have time for that. So I apologize. Do you all want a few minutes break before we jump into the next section?
Speak up now if you do.
Okay, we're going to keep going. I apologize that this is so fast. So next up, we're going to actually move into creating basic charts. And I think in this case, we just want to introduce some terms that are helpful. In a chart, you'll hear the word data points, which refer to values. And you'll hear data series, which refers to a collection of values that are all related. You'll also hear, and generally, like if you ask the question, what does this chart show? You're looking at your answers are going to be your data series. You also have the term data category, which is kind of like a secondary view of the data. It can get confusing, and the reason why you want to know the difference between series and category is because Excel uses that when it builds its charts, and occasionally it builds a chart in a way that you're like, wait, why did it do that? And then you can go in and manipulate and change the series in the data if you kind of understand what that is. So we have some examples here, probably not a lot of time to spend on them, but here we have the count of papers published by faculty members. So it lists every faculty member and the number of papers that they've published in all years of their career. So John Allen has published 2 papers. In this case, our series are the papers, and our categories, our secondary view of those papers is each faculty member. As we add data, that kind of shifts. So if we're looking at the count of papers published by faculty members by year, now we've got not all years, we're actually looking at that secondary view of papers by year. Our series are actually each one of our faculty members, and our categories, our buckets that we're dropping it into, are the years. If we look at the next one, which is the count of presentations given in papers published by Dr. Allen, so we're not just looking at one person, we have our series, our published papers, or in our presentations, and our categories are by year, our buckets. So you can see that data can look very different and be shaped in different ways. Those categories and those series are going to be different depending on what data we're looking at. Don't overwhelm yourself with that though, because it does take a bit of time to kind of get used to that. Because Excel has a lot of ways that it will provide charts to you automatically, so you don't necessarily need to know that right away moving into it. So some chart types, we just have some examples here. We've got, bar charts, column charts, combo charts. All of these you can make in Excel. We won't have time to cover all of them in this course, but you can see in column N, it's like, where is it covered? So in the Creating Basic Charts tab, in the Advanced Charts tabs, or in our hands-on workbook that we're going to cover in a minute. And then we're going to go to page 3. So this is a very basic, how do you put in a basic chart in Excel? You can use recommended charts. So in order to do that, you are simply going to highlight the data that you want to chart. In this case, we've got that Dr. Allen's papers data set. On the Insert tab, you're going to choose Recommended Charts, and then you're just going to choose the type of chart that fits your data best. And so you can choose any kind of chart that you want. Just a note, in some versions of Excel, when you're adding, for instance, a line chart, if your x-axis contains a label, like the label years, so in your chart where it says years, Excel's not going to recognize that as years. And so you need to delete that. Just delete it. Then go back and try this whole thing again, and then you'll get your data appropriately charted in your recommended charts. I just mentioned that because in some earlier versions of Excel, you really did not want the word years in there because it wouldn't give you the right recommended charts. Okay, so we're also going to practice inserting a blank chart just so you can see the process. And I hope that we can see all of the pop-up charts here, pop-up things here in Annette. So hopefully it goes well. So you don't have to use the recommend charts. You can actually manipulate and kind of create charts yourself. Occasionally you want to do that. So let's just see what that process is. So you're going to actually click an empty cell in your workbook. Don't select any data, just an empty cell. In the Insert tab, you're going to choose the type of chart that you want to insert. For this example, we're going to use the 2D column chart. And when you do that, Excel, the 2D column chart, Excel is going to just put in an empty chart. So Annette's going to want to move that off to the side so it's not covering her data. Okay, so then you're going to click on that blank chart. And in the Chart Tools Design tab that comes across the top there, when you check on it, you see Chart Tools Design. There you go. You're going to choose Select Data. In the Series section, they call it Legend Entries, Series section, you're going to click Add. In the Edit Series box for series name, you're going to select the column Published Papers. You just want the name of what that's going to be. Oh, Annette, I don't think we can see it. So we're gonna have to go down to our handy dandy little process, or little, yeah, okay. So we've selected the 2D column chart. You've selected the chart, you've gone up and selected the data. And now you need to put in information. So the very first thing is you want to put in your published papers. So that's in the series name. And in the series values, you want to highlight the column of data. So that B, in this case, it's B2 through 6. And then click OK. And then the next thing you want to do is in the axis labels, you'll go through that edit series to add the next series of data, which is the professional presentation. So you actually do need to do that twice. And then in the axis labels, you're going to say, okay, I want my axis to be labeled with 2014 through 2018. So you're going to pop that range in there. And then what that should do is it should create this chart that you see here. And apologies, we can't see pop-ups. I'm not sure why that is. But that's the process you'd walk through to feed Excel your data and make your own chart. Okay. So we're not going to jump into charts here. We're actually going to open our hands-on workbook so that you have some data to practice with. And we were going to do this as a breakout, but just given the fact that we don't have a lot of time, I think what we're going to do is do it together. So this is our Creating a Basic Charts workbook. And if someone could pop the DOI for that in the chat. And I think that's being on time. I think I have it here if it's not.
Karen, can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
I was just trying to get the DOI.
That's fine.
So this is our there we go, our hands-on workbook. So this has a bunch of data in it, and you can use it to make all different kinds of charts. It also is really good for identifying like what shape your data needs to be in order to make a particular chart. So in this case, if we click on all kinds of bar charts, let's start there. Okay, so you have pictures here of the types of charts you want to make. But when you're looking at this and you're trying it, of course, you can use recommended charts. That's just fine. But this is also kind of a reminder of what your data needs to look like in order to make that chart. So in this case, if we're creating just a simple bar chart, you would highlight your range of data, go to the Insert tab, and then click on the 2D clustered bar chart. You can see what that looks like. Okay. Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay. 2D clustered bar. There we go. There we go. Yeah, we got a bar, not column. There we go. Okay. And then let's say maybe instead you have another category of data added on to that now. You've got fall and spring. So it's not just like all together you've got two. So now you want to think, okay, how do I want to visualize this? You've got some options. So in this case, go ahead and see what it looks like as a stacked bar chart. So you're going to highlight the data that you want, and you're going to choose the 2D stacked bar chart. Okay, so now you can see what that looks like. But what if you want to look at that same data and now you just want to show proportionately, like percentage-wise, how this data differs, right? So you're not just counting the different sessions, you want to see like what percentage of each session was in the fall versus the spring. So in that case, let's look at the 100% stacked bar chart. So Annette's going to highlight our data, and we're going to do the 2D 100% stacked bar chart. So there we go. There you go. And now you're seeing the same data just a little bit differently. And so the other thing that we could do is we could actually cluster it. So if we want to compare it to each other, we don't necessarily want them stacked on top of each other. We want to see each in their own. We're going to use what's called the clustered bar chart. So let's insert, and this is the 2D clustered bar chart. And there you're seeing the clustered bar chart. And so this is just to kind of remind you of the different options you have for bar charts. You can also do column charts. We're not going to go into that. It's very similar to bar charts. Is there a chart on this list that someone wants us to walk through making? Just look at the bottom. We could do a combo chart, a radar chart. Anyone? Let's do a donut chart. Yeah, thanks, Annette. Let's stick on that. So remember, donut charts can have different rings. This one is just going to have one ring. We have a suggestion for a bubble chart, so we'll do that after this. So in this case, you're going to highlight the range of the data. In the Insert tab, you're going to choose that donut chart. This is really just to get you feeling for what your data has to look like in order to use a donut chart. And so we'll go in here and choose donut. And then now we see Remember, we don't want to have too many slices in this because it can get really challenging for us to understand proportion. But this is kind of a nice, there's not too much here. Some would say only 3. You can only have 3 or 4, but we've gone a little bit bigger with that. But basically, your eyes are drawn to kind of what are the biggest areas and what are the smallest areas in this. And so these are numbers of questions answered in topical areas from clinical rounds. Let's go to the bubble chart. Bubble charts are great when you have 3 series of data. And so in this case, I have some research in citation data, citation impact data. So this came from Insights. So we have documents that were published in the field of cardiology. We have their category normalized citation impact. And in case anyone's familiar or wants to know a little bit more about that metric, 1.0 is what you would consider the average. So the global average, everyone's paper would be at 1.0, and then anything above 1.0 means the paper is more highly cited when compared to similar papers. And so in this case, 8 means that they're pretty highly cited. We also have the average percentile rank, so it's a very similar metric, but we're just looking at all the papers sorted in their subject area by time cited, and now we have them in percentiles. This is the average percentile for papers in cardiology. And then finally, we have the number of documents that we were looking at. So how many documents were published in that subject area. And it was a very quick explanation. I apologize. It could have been better. But basically what you're going to do in this case is you're going to highlight the range of cells containing the data that's going to be used to create the chart. For the bubble chart, don't highlight the series names. So you don't want the series names. So there'd be this is the departments or the subject areas. So you don't want to highlight that. That's gotta, nope. So you just want to highlight the data. Just the data. There we go. Okay. The first column in the table is going to be the x-axis. The second column is going to be the y-axis, and the third column is going to be the size of the bubbles. So keep that in mind when you're shaping your data and getting it ready to visualize. In the Insert tab on that ribbon, you're going to click on the Scatter or Bubble Chart in the Charts Group command. So there you go, right there. And so choose the bubble chart. There we go. And select the bubble from the drop-down menu. And then you can actually start formatting, doing some extra formatting. And this is something that we don't have a lot of time to, we're going to go into next. But basically on here, in the, select the plus button next to the chart. And you're going to see that some chart elements come up. And go ahead and click on the gray arrow next to data labels. So if you go down to data labels, there's going to be a gray arrow, and that's going to open up some options for you. More options will open if you go down to more options. Click on that. There we go. Now you've got this whole format section open. We'll talk about this in just a minute, how you get this open normally. But in the format data labels, you can actually check values from cells. So click on the label is going to contain the values from the cell. There you go. Sorry, Annette, you've got, and then you want to highlight the department names. And so her chart's in the way there, but that's okay. There we go. Now you're going to click on the plus button again. Yep, we'll go back through the process. And so under data labels, the data labels, yep, the little gray arrow, and then more options that'll get you back to where you want to be. And then you want to look at the little bars there, and then label options. And trust me, none of this is intuitive. So now values from cells, and you want to highlight the pop-up isn't showing, so you want to highlight there you go. So now what she's just done is she's added values from her cells into that label. And we still have some other we kind of moved where we're at, but there are some other values still checked. So you can see we've got a percentage there. I think it's the percentile rank is still showing, but that's how you get some additional data in there. Okay, so we're actually going to jump into the formatting charts back in our workbook, our other workbook. But please feel free to keep playing with data in this hands-on piece because there's a lot there to work with. Annette, thank you for being for driving the bus today. Super helpful. I apologize because Annette's probably like, where am I going? Okay, so we're going to click on formatting charts, the formatting charts tab. And we're just going to cover this a little bit because it's not intuitive how you find all these menus. So there's actually two options for formatting chart in Excel. The first option is to use that chart tools ribbon, which provides options for designing and formatting the entire chart. And the second option is to use the format panel. And that's where you find all that in-depth stuff that you want. Okay, so to find the chart tools tab, that ribbon, you're going to click once on an existing chart. So she's got an existing chart there. There we go. And you're going to see that new tab chart tools across the top, and it includes both design and format options. So design includes adding chart elements, changing the overall color pattern, and choosing pre-made chart styles and changing the data that you have in there. If you're like, I need different data, or the chart type, you're like, that wasn't a good chart type, you can do that there. And then the format includes drop down to choose different chart elements, and you can kind of just do some different editing there. You could add word art apparently, but there are things that you can do. But really, I think mostly where we're going to spend our time is in that format panel. So in order to find that, you just need to double click on any of those chart elements. So if you double click on it, what it should do is, now she double clicked just on the chart itself, so it opened that format chart area. But if she were to double click on something else in the chart, let's say one of the axes, so now we're going to format the data series. And then Annette, can you do maybe the X or Y axis? If you double click on it, now you can see we're formatting the axis. So that's one way. If you're like, hey, I know what I want to format, just click on it. There's also a lot of drop downs and things to see across there. So if you look at the axis options, that's a drop down to change that to some other area of the chart, like the chart area, which we were in before. And then let's say you've like, okay, I want to do the axis. Now you've got the paint bucket, the little pentagon, and all of those menus. And I tell you the number of times I have to click through and be like, okay, what's in here again? It's, I don't know, that's Excel for you, but there's a lot you can do there. Note that if you just want to change your font, you can use the Home tab to change the font. So like the word documents, if you wanted to change that to something, you can just use the font there in the Home tab to edit it. And then, so let's go ahead. We're going to work on the axis, formatting the axis. So let's go to page 2 and just focus on that for just a few minutes. So in a chart that you create, the axis labels are shown below the category or the x-axis and next to the vertical or y-axis. Your chart uses text from its source data for these labels, and you can adjust the size of that. You can also adjust the scale of the axis. You can reverse the order of it. So let's just practice a little bit with the axes. So first we're going to adjust the text size. So you can click anywhere along the x-axis, that horizontal axis of the chart. Right click on it and select font. So that's one way that you can choose the font, maybe Arial, put it to bold, size 14. And so there you go, changing that font. So click OK when you're done. And you can also do that along the y-axis. So click anywhere on there, right click, choose font. Got these options that pop up. So that's one way to choose the font if you don't want to use that ribbon across the top, the home ribbon. And then let's move on and let's actually adjust the Y axis scale. So you're going to click anywhere along the Y axis of an existing chart to activate it. And now you've activated it. Right click on it and select Format Axis. That's going to open up your Format Axis menu. There we go. You could also just have double clicked on it like we did earlier. I just wanted to show there's some different options for you. So in the Format Axis pane, make your changes to the axis options. So that's what you see across the top, that drop down. She's got it just right there. And click on the input box next to the desired axis option. Maybe type in a new scale. In bounds, maybe change that to change it like to 20, maximum to 20 or something like that. I don't know, just playing around with it. And then click OK and see what it looks like. So now you're seeing, we didn't want that. I mean, that's like less, maybe put it as 100, try that, or 200 or something. There we go. So now we're just changing the scale that we're seeing on that axis, right? So we don't have values in the 100, so we are up to 100. We didn't need that, but that's one option that you can do. And then if you want to click, you can click the close button, which I don't see, Annette, on your screen, but that will close that pane, that axis pane, so you don't see it anymore. Let's say you want to add an access title. So what you can do is click on the chart, click on that plus button next to the chart, choose Legend and Access Titles from the Chart Elements menu, and then click on the Access Title text box to add the text. So if you just add it on there, you can go ahead and click on, let's say, yep. Oh, so the Access Titles, not the Access. There you go. And now you can add text in there. If you want, once you click on that access title, you can click on the formula bar and type in equals. So she's just typing text in, but if you wanted it to come from a cell in your spreadsheet, you can go ahead and go to the formula bar, well, now that you've selected it, and click on the type in equal, and then put in the cell reference that you want it to reference. So on that, there you go. So she could click on that. Let's say she wants it to be year. So she can put equal and then the cell reference. And then, did you put equal? Nice. Here we go.
It's
Oh. It's okay. Yeah. So you got to go back and click on your axis title again. There you go. This is the axis title. I think maybe you have the charts. Well, we'll see if it works. Click equal and then go up to your function box. And then click on year. There you go. And then hit enter. Yay! We got it in there. So there we go. So that's one way you can get it right from the box. You can also reverse the order of your y-axis. So click anywhere along the y-axis to activate it. Right click, select Format Axis. It's going to open that Format Axis box. You could also double click on it. That would have opened this. And then you can see in your under Axis options, there's a checkbox for categories in reverse order. And then that will reverse your categories. You can also adjust the X-axis labels from top to bottom. So go ahead and click anywhere on the X-axis of the existing chart to activate it. And right-click on Format Axis, opens that Format Axis pane. And in your labels, under Axis Options, you can choose High. Format Axis, right-click or just double-click on it. There we go. Opens it up. And then under Labels, so down, there you go. Go ahead and click High. Try that. And unfortunately, it's weird, it reversed it, but there you go. So you can see it moved it down. All right, so we are actually don't have time to go into the rest of this workbook. We just wanted to give you a little taste of how you can format your charts and where to find all that really good formatting stuff. And there's more that you can do We hope you enjoyed today's class. We're around for questions. And feel free to use any of these materials as you see fit for any classes you might want to teach. And you can also change or edit anything you'd like. Oh, so we have a question. Is there a way to switch the data from the x-axis to the y-axis? So you want to switch, and I think what you would need to do, and I'm just going to get an example. So you're saying that you want to show like years on the bottom maybe and the category on the top. So in that case, you might want to do that insert chart and put your data in differently, if that makes sense, so that you can flip it around. Okay. Sarah says, yeah, okay. That's what she's usually done. Okay, yes, yes. Yeah, that's probably the best way to do it, because Excel is going to just give it to you in the way that it knows or thinks that it should be.
Hey, Karen, does she mean like if you have a chart, like if I select this chart, and does she mean like this, switch column or rows? The thing is you have to be really careful.
Yes.
Right. So like sometimes I'm like, oh, well, I'm not presenting this the right way. You know, it's more obvious if I do it the other way. But then I'm like, how do I get if I have my columns on the, you know, my numbers are going this way. It's like, is there an easy way for me to just click a button and it'll automatically reverse it for me?
Try the switch columns or rows, or if you really need it reversed or changed, I would say, and it's not like Excel's not understanding it, I would say create the chart the way that you want in the manually enter the data. Yeah.
Okay. But I have an email address now for an Excel expert, so.
Oh, Annette and I spend a lot of time just being like, wait, what? Why isn't this working? That's half of data visualization. And it takes time. That's one thing I do want to mention is this is meant to take time. So it's not meant to be an easy or fast process. It doesn't matter if you're using Excel or Python or Click or Tableau. There is your brain figuring this out. It is not a fast process, and don't let anyone make you feel like it should be, because it's not. It does take time.
And I have to say, Karen spent a lot of time on this workbook. And really, if you go through each of the tabs and practice the exercises, because she has samples, she took a lot of time to give you an example of what it could look like. It isn't what it has to look like. But when you go in there and play with some of the different functions in Excel, like, you know, change chart type and things like that, you can see different ways to visualize it. But she gives you some really great resources and really spells out how to get to it. But, you know, there have been times Karen and I have been in Excel a lot, and like, I'll still be like, oh man, how do I get to this? Something that we've done tons of times, but there's so much functionality in this program, and we take it for granted because most of us have access to Excel, you know, as part of the Microsoft platform, and we just don't use it to the ability that you could use it for. So.
Mm-hmm. And really quickly, we have one additional add-in that we mentioned. It's called Power User. It is an add-on for Excel, and if you work for an academic institution or nonprofit, I believe, you can get access to it for free. But that's how we make our Sankey diagrams and our Corepleth, or those geographic maps. So.
Well, thank you so much, Karen and Annette. You've shown us just a wealth of things that are available in Excel, and I tend to use it for very simple things. I also appreciate you showing the glitches and talking about the challenges, because you seem like such experts, and it's good to hear that sometimes you run into a little difficulty too. It's always nice to know that it's not just me being stupid. So if people have any more questions, pop them in real quickly. I'm mostly seeing great work. Thank you so much. Joy, yes, we will have, this is being recorded, and so if you'll email me, I can make sure that you get the recording. And once again, Annette and Karen, thank you so much. I love having you come. Karen did a session a few years ago, and I was afraid it was going to be way over my head, and she just made it so accessible and approachable. So thank you very much. Stick around if you want to, but I'm sure you've got other things to do, so we're glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And we have our next session is at noon, and that is with our sponsor highlights. So you have a little time now if you